Will Smith is significantly bigger than me. We are not the same size. Never gonna happen. No. I took that hit like Pacquiao.
To social media on Friday, 4 months after he took the Oscar stage and smacked Rock across the face.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Chris got slapped in the face at the Oscars by Will Smith, which was one of the craziest things I'd ever seen. In fact, if you watch it live on television like I did, when it happened, I thought it was fake. I did, and I wasn't sure, so you know what I did? I waited, because unlike you, I know Chris. I waited like 30, 40 minutes, and I called him on FaceTime, and he picked up. As soon as he picked up, he said, "You was the only nigga to answer the phone for." And apparently, Obama and Oprah, everybody had called us. Everything's all right.
From explosive stand-up specials to shocking on-stage attacks, Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle have peeled back a layer of Hollywood no one was ready for. What did they really expose about Will, and could it crush what's left of his reputation for good? Let's dive into this Hollywood chaos that blew up when no one saw it coming. Chris Rock's ruthless 10-minute roast set the internet on fire. On March 4th, 2023, Netflix made history with its first ever live comedy special, Chris Rock's Selective Outrage. The show went live from Baltimore's Hippodrome Theater and felt like a full-blown comedy Super Bowl. It had everything: a pre-show, an after-show, Ronnie Chiang cracking jokes, David Spade and Dana Carvey bringing the laughs, and surprise celebrity drop-ins from Arsenio Hall to Leslie Jones. Chris hit the stage dressed sharp in all white, rocking a flashy Prince necklace, and before dropping a single punchline, he warned the crowd he'd try not to offend anyone because, well, you never know who might get triggered these days. For a full hour, he tore into everything: woke culture, the idea of selective outrage, the Kardashians, and even Meghan Markle. Every line hit like a spark, and the crowd couldn't get enough. Chris didn't just talk jokes, he dove deep into real-life issues and messy social debates. He broke down selective outrage, calling out how people pick and choose who gets canceled depending on their personal favorites. He joked that folks will still blast Michael Jackson's music, but won't touch R. Kelly's tracks, not because one's cleaner than the other, but because, as Chris said, one of them just got better songs. The crowd went wild at that one.
And I thought it was fake. I didn't know. So I asked him, I go, well, you know. He said, what? I said, hurt? And he said, yes, nigga, it hurt. Then I knew that it was real. And then, and only then, was I offended. And I wasn't just offended that he got slapped. That was only half of it. The real offensive part was that after he slapped him, this Will just sat down and enjoyed the rest of his evening. It was crazy.
But then, with just 10 minutes left, the whole vibe shifted. It was time for that moment. Chris finally addressed the slap heard around the world. He started by admitting it straight. He got smacked by someone he once had deep respect for. He said he stayed silent for a long time, even while everyone kept asking, did it hurt? That's when he hit him with the truth. Yeah, it still hurts. I got summertime still ringing in my ears. The audience exploded with laughter, but the pain behind the joke was clear. Chris painted the scene perfectly. Will Smith towering over him, built like a movie star, while he was a comedian just trying to do his job. He made sure everyone got the message. This wasn't a fair fight. He even cracked that Will played Muhammad Ali while he played Pookie in New Jack City and a piece of corn in Pootie Tang. The punchline hit just as hard as the slap itself. The moment Chris dropped the word entanglement, the whole crowd exploded. He was clearly calling out that unforgettable Red Table Talk episode where Jada Pinkett Smith opened up about her relationship with singer August Alsina, and people have never stopped talking about it. Chris didn't sugarcoat a thing. He said flat out that Jada got involved with her own son's friend. He told the audience he usually wouldn't air something that personal, but since they were the ones who put it all online, it was fair game. Then, Chris's game plan became crystal clear. He wasn't just cracking jokes anymore. He was laying down hard truth. He said Jada had hurt Will way worse than Will ever hurt him. He pointed out how the whole world had called Will every name in the book and even labeled Jada a predator. Yet, instead of confronting any of that, Will came for Chris, the one person he knew he could beat. Chris didn't hold back, calling it straight-up weak behavior.
Jada, I love you. G.I. Jane 2, can't wait to see it. All right? That was a nice one. Okay. I'm out here. Rich. Oh, wow. Wow.
Nick Mike's name out your mouth.
Wow, dude.
Yes.
It was a G.I. Jane joke.
Keep my wife's name out your mouth.
I'm going to, okay? Okay.
His analysis cut deep. Chris made it clear that the slap wasn't about defending Jada's honor at all. It was about anger that had been boiling for years. Will couldn't go after August out. He couldn't clap back at the internet, roasting him non-stop. So who did he take it out on? Chris Rock, the easy target that night, standing right there on the Oscar stage. Chris reminded everyone that Will didn't just pick any target. He picked a smaller man, someone he knew wouldn't swing back, especially at an event where every move was caught on camera. It was a global stage, and Will turned it into his own twisted show of macho pride. Then Chris dug even deeper, bringing up the old tension that had been brewing since the 2016 Oscars. Back then, Jada Pinkett Smith publicly said that Chris should quit hosting the ceremony because her husband didn't get nominated for concussion. That moment planted the seed for years of bad blood. Chris told the crowd how wild that was. Jada basically tried to start a boycott and then got upset when he joked about it. He made it clear nobody was bullying her. She started the fire. As Chris put it, she was the one saying a grown man should quit his job because her husband didn't get nominated for concussion. Then he threw the punchline that had the audience in stitches. And now this person gives me a concussion. The wordplay hit hard, turning Will's serious sports drama into a wild, ironic punchline about the slap itself. Finally, Chris softened his tone just a little, admitting that he always admired Will Smith. He said he grew up loving the guy, which made the whole situation sting even more. Chris flipped the script completely. He took a scene that was supposed to show Will Smith's strength and turned it into a wild, ironic punchline. He joked about whipping Will Smith, twisting the whole meaning of resilience against oppression into a sharp jab about karma and punishment. The crowd gasped, then burst out laughing. That's the magic of Chris Rock. Even when the imagery gets dark, his delivery is so bold that people can't help but laugh. Then he wrapped it all up by finally answering the question everyone had been asking for a whole year. Why didn't you hit him back? Chris said it plain and simple, because he's got parents. He was raised right. He explained that his folks taught him never to fight in front of white people, and that line shattered the crowd. Laughter, shock, everything at once. But behind the joke was something powerful. Chris revealed that his parents raised him with dignity, to understand how black people are constantly being watched, judged, and criticized. He said violence in those moments doesn't prove strength, it just feeds the stereotypes that have followed for generations. His choice not to fight back wasn't fear, it was wisdom.
Y'all know what happened to me, getting smacked by Suge Smith. Yeah, he know he could beat. That is some years ago, his wife said I should quit the Oscars. I shouldn't host because her man didn't get nominated. So then I do some jokes about her. Who gives a That's how it is. She starts it, I finish it. That's what nobody's picking on this bitch. She started this.
By the end of Selective Outrage, it was clear. Chris wasn't just roasting Will Smith. He was peeling back layers of pain, pride, and psychology to show the world exactly what he thought was really going on behind that slap. Sources close to Will Smith say he couldn't even bring himself to watch Chris Rock's special. Instead, he had people fill him in on what was said. Word is, Will felt totally humiliated and crushed by Chris's comments about him and his family, especially since clips and memes from the show were everywhere online. He reportedly told friends that after trying to make peace with Chris, enough was enough. He just wants everyone to move on. But Will wasn't just hurt, he was mad too. Insiders claim he felt Netflix went too far by giving Chris such a massive platform to drag his family all over again. He thought the jokes about Jada crossed a serious line. Yet no matter how upset Will felt, Chris's brutal takedown was his own way of finally fighting back, with words, not fists. And what made it sting even more? This was only one comedian's response to that unforgettable slap. Long before Selective Outrage dropped, that Oscars moment had already shaken Hollywood to its core. The infamous slap heard around the world became a symbol of chaos in live TV history. It all started on the night of the 94th Academy Awards inside the Dolby Theater in Hollywood. Chris Rock stepped on stage in a sleek blue velvet tuxedo jacket to present the Oscar for Best Documentary Feature, completely unaware that within seconds he'd be part of the most replayed, dissected, and shocking moment ever broadcast on live television. Chris Rock's history with the Smiths didn't start that night. It went way back. In 2016, he hosted the Oscars during the height of the #OscarsSoWhite controversy, when Jada Pinkett Smith publicly boycotted the show over the lack of diversity in nominations. Will Smith had been snubbed for his performance in Concussion, and Jada made it clear she wouldn't be attending. That year, Chris turned the tension into comedy gold. During his monologue, he joked, "Jada boycotting the Oscars is like me boycotting Rihanna's panties. I wasn't invited." The crowd erupted in laughter, but behind the scenes, that punchline hit a nerve that would simmer for years. Fast forward to 2022, 6 years later, and history seemed to circle right back around. Chris was on stage again, looking out into the glittering Oscar audience, and he made what he later called the nicest joke he ever told. When he saw Jada's shaved head, a result of her struggle with alopecia, an autoimmune condition that causes hair loss, he quipped, "Can't wait for G.I. Jane 2. It was a quick joke, referencing Demi Moore's iconic buzzed head role from 1997. The reaction was awkward. The crowd gave a soft laugh, unsure if they should go all in. The camera then zoomed in on Jada, who rolled her eyes, clearly unamused, but trying to keep her composure. What seemed like just another edgy joke from Chris Rock was about to turn into one of the most unforgettable live TV moments in live TV history. Through the speakers, the world heard it. "Oh, wow, wow." Chris Rock stumbled back, clutching his face, his look flipping from confusion to total shock as Will Smith coolly turned and walked back to his seat. The entire Dolby Theater froze. Gasps, whispers, chaos. People didn't know if they'd just seen a skit or something deadly serious. Even Chris himself looked unsure for a split second, like he couldn't believe what just happened. Then came the moment that shattered every doubt. From his front row seat, Will's voice thundered through the microphones, twice, louder and angrier each time. "Keep my wife's name out of your mouth."
I promise we'll be able to be friends again.
I don't care. I don't care. I thought I was gonna die. It was a weird...
The outburst echoed across the world, unedited, raw, and filled with rage. Normally, live TV would have censored that language in a flash, but international broadcasts aired every word. That's when everyone realized this wasn't a bit, this was real. Real anger, real violence happening live at Hollywood's most glamorous event. Still in shock, Chris tried to hold it together. He stood tall, smirking through the sting, and muttered what would become a viral line for the ages. That was the greatest night in the history of television. The crowd didn't know whether to laugh or hide their faces. And unbelievably, the show just moved on. No cut to commercial, no apology, just business as usual. The aftermath of that slap didn't just fade away. It took over the world. For weeks, social media couldn't stop buzzing about it. Everyone had an opinion. Was it toxic masculinity, fake chivalry, or just raw celebrity privilege on display? Some people praised Will for protecting his wife's honor, while others were firm that no matter the reason, violence on live TV was completely out of line. Comedians, though, they stood united, no question about it. Their rule was simple and absolute. You don't hit performers for telling jokes, ever. Jim Carrey went off on CBS Morning, saying straight up, you don't have a right to walk up on stage and smack somebody in the face because they said words. He even added that if he were Chris Rock, he'd have sued Will for $200 million because, as he put it, that video was gonna be there forever. The man didn't hold back. Carrey didn't stop there either. He blasted Hollywood's reaction too, calling out the crowd for giving Will Smith a standing ovation right after the slap. He called the industry spineless for cheering on someone who had just committed assault on live TV. Meanwhile, Bill Maher chimed in saying, alopecia isn't leukemia, we all deal with our hair. And Ricky Gervais threw in his own dark humor, joking, I'm fat and balding, where's my award? Everyone had a take, but one thing was crystal clear. That moment shook the entertainment world to its core. The punishment that followed was seen as both harsh and too soft. Will Smith was banned from the Oscars and all Academy events for 10 years, a serious blow for any actor, but critics argued it wasn't enough. Many asked the bigger question, shouldn't assault on live television come with real legal consequences, not just Hollywood ones? Chris Rock, however, wanted no part of that. He refused to press charges, turned out every major interview, and stayed completely silent for almost a year. Reporters hounded him, fans begged him to speak, and media outlets threw money his way, but he didn't bite. That silence said it all. Chris wasn't going to give Will the satisfaction of watching him crumble or play the victim. He wasn't chasing sympathy, he was saving his fire for the stage. His comeback wouldn't be through lawsuits or headlines, it would be through comedy.
And then all year, I couldn't wait to see what he was going to say in his special about this slap. And I toured him all year, but the night he taped his special, Chris was one of these guys that's crafty. You never know what he's going to say until he really says it. So I went to see him tape his special. He taped it right up the street in Baltimore. He shocked a Baltimore crowd. I didn't even know that was possible. I started doing comedy around here. Shocked them. All black, Baltimore black.
But just before Chris finally broke that silence, another shocking moment hit the comedy world, this time involving Dave Chappelle. The slap had opened the floodgates. Suddenly, people thought it was okay to physically lash out at comedians for their words. And within weeks, Chappelle became the next victim. Only 5 weeks after Will Smith's slap rocked the Oscars, Dave Chappelle was performing live at the Hollywood Bowl during Netflix's Netflix is a Joke Festival when chaos struck again. An audience member stormed the stage, tackling Chappelle mid-performance and proving once and for all that the slap had changed the game for every comedian in the business. As Dave Chappelle neared the end of his set, chaos erupted out of nowhere. A man from the audience suddenly stormed the stage, armed with a fake gun that hit a folding knife blade and tackled Chappelle to the ground in front of thousands. The attacker, later identified as 23-year-old Isaiah Lee, somehow slipped past security, jumped a barrier, and went straight for one of the biggest names in comedy. The crowd gasped in disbelief as the shocking scene unfolded. But this time, Chappelle wasn't alone. Hollywood heavyweights Jamie Foxx and Busta Rhymes were right there in the audience, and they didn't hesitate for a second. Both of them jumped in, helping security take Lee down and drag him off the stage. The man was quickly arrested and hit with 4 misdemeanor charges: battery, possession of a weapon with intent to assault, unauthorized stage access during a performance, and disrupting an event. The whole thing felt unreal, like a scene straight out of a movie. Luckily, Chappelle escaped without injuries, though the attack definitely shook him up. Still, being the comedian he is, Dave turned the madness into material almost immediately. Just 2 days later, he performed a secret show at LA's legendary Comedy Store, and who joined him on stage? Chris Rock himself. Their banter became instant comedy gold. Chappelle laughed and told Chris, "At least you got smacked by somebody of repute. I got smacked by a homeless dude with leaves in his hair." The crowd roared, 2 comedy legends turning pain into punchlines once again. Chris fired back that night with a savage one-liner that had the whole room howling. He said he got smacked by the softest person that ever rapped. The crowd lost it. That punchline hit harder than the slap itself. It wasn't just an insult, it was pure comedy precision. Chris wasn't calling Will crazy or violent. He was stripping away that tough guy image, poking fun at Will's 1990s rap career filled with feel-good hits like Getting Jiggy With It and Summertime. Fun song, sure, but no street cred. By calling him the softest rapper, Chris landed a deeper blow. He was saying Will's whole macho act was just for show, all performance and no punch. It was brutal, funny, and sharp all at once. Interestingly, Chris had already made a sly reference to Will right after Dave Chappelle's Hollywood Bowl attack. When Chappelle was tackled on stage, Chris jumped up with perfect timing and joked, "Was that Will Smith?" The crowd cracked up instantly. The joke worked on multiple layers. It nodded to the Oscar slap, lightened the tension around Chappelle's scary moment, and proved that comedians, even after being attacked, can't help but turn chaos into comedy.
And this is what he said. He went to that crowd. He said, "I refuse to be a victim." I said, and I was backstage looking like, watch the tape.
Comedy club owners across the country started connecting the dots too. Danny Zale, the owner of Stand Up New York, admitted that before Will Smith's slap, no one ever imagined someone would actually hit a comic over a joke. After that moment, everything changed, and comedians everywhere began to look over their shoulders mid-set. The invisible fence, that unspoken line between performer and audience, had always been sacred. For decades, it was a rule everyone understood. You could heckle, boo, or even walk out, but you never stormed the stage. That silent contract protected comedians from real-world violence until Will Smith's slap shattered it completely. In one shocking moment, he sent a dangerous message that hitting a performer for a joke might actually be okay to some people. Comedian Howie Mandel didn't hold back when he talked about it afterward. He warned that the slap had opened the floodgates, saying flat out, "Violence triggers violence, and this is the beginning of the end for comedy." It sounded dramatic, but honestly, he wasn't wrong. For the first time, comedians everywhere started to wonder if stepping on stage was actually safe anymore. How could you joke freely if you were scared someone might charge you mid-punchline? Comedy has always been about risk, about saying the uncomfortable thing and seeing who laughs. But fear of getting attacked, that kills the whole spirit of it. It makes performers hesitate, hold back, and second-guess every word. After Dave Chappelle's attack, his team released a statement that summed it up perfectly. They called his Hollywood Bowl shows epic and record-breaking and said he refused to let that one violent moment take away from the magic of what he created. Even in chaos, true comedians keep the show alive. That moment of defiance, comedians refusing to bow to fear, meant everything. By standing tall and refusing to let violence dictate their craft, performers like Chappelle and Chris Rock were protecting the heart of comedy itself. Every laugh, every punchline depends on freedom of speech and the courage to say what others won't. Giving in to fear would have meant letting the attackers win, and they weren't about to let that happen. But Chappelle's assault also made something chillingly clear. Will's infamous slap had changed the game. What once seemed unthinkable had suddenly become possible. The line between offense and violence had blurred. Some people even began to justify physical retaliation against comedians, claiming that offensive jokes deserve a hit. It was a dangerous shift, not a conspiracy, but a chain reaction. Will's action had been broadcast to billions, and with little more than a professional slap on the wrist as punishment, it felt like open season on comedians. The message was loud and clear. Attack a performer, and you might just walk away with attention instead of consequences.
You know, everything's funny. Everything's funny till it happens to you. 3 months after that terrible attack that Chris Rock endured, I was on stage at the Hollywood Bowl, and a lunatic jumped out of the crowd and attacked me. Now, I gotta tell you, if it happens to you, you don't even know what the fuck is happening. It was like slow motion. I just looked over. I don't know this nigga. I just looked and said, oh my God, I'm being attacked.
So the world waited, curious and tense. How would Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle respond? Would they play it safe, tone down their edge, and beef up security before every show? Or would they fire back harder than ever, using laughter as their weapon? 4 months later, the answer came when the two legends joined forces for a joint tour that no one saw coming. 4 months after that unforgettable Oscar slap, Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle finally stepped back into the spotlight. Together. On Friday, September 1st, 2022, the two comedy giants kicked off a joint tour in Liverpool, England, performing at the M&S Bank Arena in front of a packed crowd buzzing with anticipation. Even though the tour had been planned long before either attack, it couldn't have come at a more symbolic time. The world was watching to see how they'd respond to all the chaos and violence that had shaken the comedy world. The Liverpool show set the tone instantly. Chris Rock took the stage first, standing under the lights with that signature smirk, and went straight for it, the slap. He didn't go as deep as he later would in Selective Outrage, but he made sure nobody forgot what happened. He even joked about Will's now infamous YouTube apology, calling it a hostage video, as if he'd been forced to read it at gunpoint. The crowd roared. Then Chris got real about the physical side of it too. He admitted that, yeah, it still hurt, and then flipped it into another killer joke. He said, Will played Ali. I can't even play Floyd Mayweather. The line hit perfectly, turning pain into laughter while reminding everyone of that massive size difference between the two men. Will Smith might have trained like a heavyweight champ for his Muhammad Ali role, but Chris made it clear he wasn't built for fighting. He was built for roasting. After Chris wrapped his set, Dave Chappelle took the stage, and what he said next became one of his most talked about takes ever. Standing under the bright lights of Liverpool's M&S Bank Arena, Chappelle looked out at the crowd and dropped a line that instantly had everyone listening. He said people seem to forget who Will Smith really is, reminding everyone that just 10 minutes before winning Hollywood's biggest award, Will acted like he was right back in Philadelphia. That line hit hard. Chappelle was digging deep, pointing out how the slap wasn't some random moment. It was the real Will Smith slipping through the cracks of his carefully polished image. Beneath the charm and movie star smiles, Chappelle suggested there was still that kid from West Philly, raw, reactive, and human. Then he said something even more profound, the statement that defined his whole perspective on the incident. Will did the impression of a perfect person for 30 years, and then he ripped his mask off and showed us he was as ugly as the rest of us. The crowd went silent for a second. It was deep, uncomfortable truth wrapped in humor. Chappelle didn't stop there. He said he hoped Will wouldn't put that mask back on again, that he'd let his real self breathe for once. And then, with honesty that only Chappelle could pull off, he admitted that he saw a bit of himself in both men. His words went way beyond gossip. He was breaking down the psychology of fame itself, the cost of pretending to be perfect, and what happens when that image finally cracks wide open.
For 3 months before that, I'd been making fun of Chris Rock. And people would ask me all the time. They'd say, Dave, what would you do if you were Chris Rock and Will Smith slapped you in the face? And to this day, the answer is the same. Well, I don't know what I would have done. I've never been in a situation that extreme. But I do know now what Will Smith would not have done. And that is enjoy the rest of his...
For over 3 decades, Will Smith had been America's golden boy, the lovable Fresh Prince, the blockbuster superstar, the devoted family man who seemed to glide through fame without a single scandal. But that one shocking slap tore the curtain down, exposing something darker: anger, pain, and deep-rooted trauma hiding under all that charm. The world suddenly saw a side of Will no one expected. Chappelle's message, hoping Will wouldn't put his mask back on, hit with both compassion and challenge. It was compassionate because it reminded everyone that Will is human, entitled to his real emotions instead of living behind a Hollywood facade. But it was also a challenge, a dare for Will to stop performing perfection and face his truth head-on. When Chappelle said he saw himself in both Chris and Will, it showed just how layered his understanding was. He recognized Chris's humiliation, but also Will's explosive frustration, a mix of pain and ego that anyone could relate to on some level. He made one thing clear: violence isn't exclusive to villains. It's a human flaw that fame doesn't erase, it just magnifies it. That same night, Chris Rock circled back to his own take, saying Will slapped him over the nicest joke he ever told. British outlets reported that this line became a major theme in Chris's story. After all, the G.I. Jane 2 joke wasn't cruel. It was mild, almost playful. And yet, Will's reaction was so extreme, it made the whole situation feel absurd. Chris summed it up perfectly on stage. G.I. Jane 2, can't wait to see it. What was meant as a harmless jab turned into Hollywood history. Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle might have performed separate sets, but every time they shared a stage, it felt electric. The two legends often riffed off each other about the attacks they'd both endured, and their message couldn't have been louder. Violence would never silence comedy. Instead of dividing comedians, it actually pulled them closer together. The shows became more than entertainment. They were statements of defiance, proof that laughter would always outlast fear. Their joint tour carried serious weight. Here were two of the most powerful black voices in modern comedy, both attacked within weeks of each other, both refusing to play the victim. Instead, they turned their pain into punchlines and their trauma into truth. While the world argued about whether violence against comedians was ever justified, Chris and Chappelle stood firm, using humor as their armor. Their courage hit harder than any slap could. Many critics didn't get it. They couldn't understand how these men kept performing jokes that could trigger controversy after what they'd been through. But that's the essence of real comedy, saying what others won't, even when it's risky. And the tour was only the start. Chris Rock had been quietly shaping new material about the slap, preparing for his next big Netflix event, Total Blackout: The Tambourine Extended Cut. Then Dave Chappelle would soon open up about the chaos in his own way, dropping his deeply reflective special, The Dreamer, more than a year later. The hits, the pain, the jokes, it all became part of comedy history.
People that don't know what everybody knows, Will Smith and his wife was her son's friend. Now, I normally would not talk about this, but for some reason, these just put that on the internet. I have no idea why two talented people would do something that low down. What the we all been been cheated on. Everybody in here have been cheated on. None of us have ever been interviewed by the person that cheated on us on television. None of us. Like, hey, I was sucking somebody else. How did that make you feel?
The Dreamer gave Dave Chappelle's side of the story, raw, thoughtful, and deeply personal. On New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2023, Netflix dropped his highly anticipated stand-up special, and fans rushed to stream it right away. While it didn't revolve around the slap as heavily as Chris Rock's Selective Outrage, Chappelle still spent a solid portion of the show unpacking the Will Smith incident from a place only he could speak from, as Will's longtime friend and as someone who'd been attacked on stage himself. Chappelle started by recalling how surreal it was to watch Chris get smacked at the Oscars, calling it one of the craziest things I've ever seen. He told the crowd that when he first watched it live on TV, he actually thought it had to be fake. Like everyone else, he figured it was some kind of wild Oscars bit gone wrong, because honestly, who could imagine that level of violence happening on the Academy stage? His confession captured what millions felt that night. Disbelief. The idea of someone storming the Oscar stage, not for a speech or a prank, but to literally hit a presenter, was unthinkable. Even Chappelle, known for his sharp takes on real-world absurdity, couldn't wrap his head around it at first. The moment felt too extreme, too bizarre, almost unreal. But as Chappelle dug deeper into the story, it became clear that what shocked him most wasn't just the slap itself, but what it said about fame, pressure, and the breaking point of keeping it all together. Chappelle revealed a wild detail that left the audience stunned. After the Oscar slap, even Barack Obama and Oprah Winfrey tried calling Chris Rock to check on him. Imagine that, two of the most powerful people in the world picking up the phone after one of Hollywood's craziest moments. But here's the twist. Chris didn't answer either of them. The revelation said everything about how he chose to handle the aftermath. Instead of leaning into fame or sympathy, Chris only picked up the phone for one person, Dave Chappelle. Not because Chappelle was a bigger name, but because he was a fellow comedian who actually got it. He understood what it meant to be violated on stage, not just embarrassed, but publicly blindsided. Chris didn't want pity, he wanted understanding, the kind only another comic could give. The fact that he ignored calls from Obama and Oprah spoke volumes. He didn't want to turn his pain into a Hollywood pity parade. He wanted to process it within the comedy world, not the celebrity one. Chappelle also got real about his own attack at the Hollywood Bowl, tying it directly to Will's slap. He even joked about it with that classic Dave wit, saying that before his attack, for 3 months straight, people kept asking him what he would have done if Will Smith had slapped him like that. His honest answer was, I don't know, because even for someone as unflappable as Chappelle, no one can truly predict how they'd react when a moment like that hits, literally. Then Chappelle dropped what would become his darkest and most daring joke about the whole thing. He said that after thinking about it, he finally realized what Will Smith wouldn't have done: enjoy the rest of his evening. The crowd roared, instantly getting the hidden meaning. The joke carried an edge. If Will had slapped Chappelle instead of Chris Rock, it wouldn't have ended with Will dancing at the after-parties to getting jiggy with it. Chappelle, or more likely his crew, would have made sure of that.
That was a greatest night in the history of television.
That punchline hit differently. Beneath the laughter, there was a quiet threat, a reminder that not everyone would have let that slap slide. Chappelle's humor had a street realism to it, something raw and unfiltered that made audiences squirm and laugh at the same time. Where Chris dissected the event with intellect and irony, Chappelle's version carried muscle, danger wrapped in humor. He also circled back to his earlier take from 2022 that Will Smith had worn the mask of perfection for 30 years before finally ripping it off at the Oscars. To Chappelle, the slap wasn't a random meltdown, it was a revelation. It exposed what had always been under the surface, the anger, the pain, and the human imperfection hiding beneath the polished Hollywood exterior. But even with all his sharpness, Chappelle's tone carried more empathy than Chris's. In The Dreamer, he saw Will not just as a man who snapped, but as someone finally breaking under decades of pressure. Meanwhile, in Selective Outrage, Chris painted Will as a man of control, calculated, selective, and cowardly for hitting someone smaller. Two legends, two perspectives, one unforgettable moment that split comedy and Hollywood in two. Chappelle's perspective stood out because it complicated the story instead of flattening it. Chris Rock had every right to be furious. He was the one who got hit, humiliated, and turned into a meme overnight.
His anger, his sharp words, his takedown of Will Smith, all of it made sense. But Chappelle, standing just outside the direct conflict while carrying scars from his own on-stage attack, brought something deeper: reflection. The man who attacked Chappelle later said he was triggered by one of the comedian's jokes, proving exactly how dangerous the climate had become for performers. Yet Chappelle didn't meet violence with bitterness. His tone was philosophical, curious, even empathetic. He wasn't excusing what happened, but trying to understand why. Why a man as beloved and disciplined as Will Smith could explode like that on live TV. Together, The Dreamer and Selective Outrage showed that Chris and Chappelle weren't teaming up to drag Will. They were each processing trauma in their own way. Two comedians, two survivors, using their art to reclaim power from violence instead of letting it define them. Everyone wanted answers. Would they forgive Will, condemn him, pretend it never happened? Instead, they did what comedians do best. They transformed it. They turned pain into punchlines, fury into laughter, and public chaos into sold-out art. The ripple effect of that one slap, followed by Chappelle's attack and both men's fearless responses, went far beyond personal beef. It reshaped conversations about comedy, celebrity, and what happens when the truth hurts just a little too much. Before that fateful Oscars night, audiences might boo, heckle, or storm out, but no one dared to cross the stage. There was an unspoken code between comedians and their crowds. Words were fair game, but hands were off limits. Then Will Smith's slap, broadcast to millions and followed by a standing ovation just 40 minutes later, shattered that code completely. Suddenly, the world saw a dangerous message play out in real time. If a movie star could hit a comedian and still walk away with applause, what was stopping anyone?
The ripple effect hit fast. Within just 5 weeks, Dave Chappelle was attacked mid-performance at the Hollywood Bowl, proving that the copycat effect was very real. Other comics soon started speaking up about a shift they could feel in the air. Audiences were bolder, rowdier, even hostile. That invisible fence between stage and crowd? Gone. Comedy clubs and theaters were forced to change how they operated. Venues added new security measures, hired extra guards, and even installed barriers to keep performers safe. What had once been a space for fearless free speech now carried a hint of danger. Some critics argued that changes were long overdue, that comedians had been getting away with offensive jokes for too long, and that maybe the backlash was a form of accountability. But others pushed back hard, saying violence is never the answer to words. For comedians, the stage had always been sacred, a place for truth, not fear. And now, that safety had been shattered. Many people started using Will Smith's slap and Dave Chappelle's attack as proof that cancel culture had evolved from social backlash into straight-up physical violence. And to some extent, that framing made sense. Both moments involved people who thought their personal anger somehow justified crossing the line into violence. But when you really break it down, the truth is way more complicated. Will Smith wasn't some activist out to cancel Chris Rock for saying something offensive. He was a husband drowning in public humiliation, lashing out at the one person who couldn't fight back. His slap wasn't about justice, it was misplaced rage, plain and simple. And Chappelle's attacker? He wasn't some organized protester reacting to controversial jokes. He was a deeply unstable man with his own inner battles, whose motives barely made sense even to him. These weren't examples of political crusades. They were raw, chaotic moments of human emotion and mental struggle exploding in front of the world. What tied them together wasn't ideology, it was the frightening idea that violence on stage had become part of the conversation. Two comedians, both hit under the lights, both turning pain into punchlines, and both forcing us to ask hard questions about where we draw the line. So now we'll ask you, whose response hit home harder? Chris Rock's razor-sharp takedown or Dave Chappelle's deep, reflective analysis? And do you think violence against comedians is becoming normalized, or were these once-in-a-lifetime explosions? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more jaw-dropping Hollywood breakdowns. Also, click the next video on your screen. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.